The desert stretched endlessly, a golden ocean frozen in waves of sand. The horizon shimmered in the blistering heat, and the air seemed heavy with a silence so vast it pressed against the ears. The explorer paused at the ridge, her boots sinking slightly into the dune, and allowed herself to breathe in the enormity of what lay before her. The pyramid. It rose from the desert floor like a jagged memory, its once smooth casing stones stripped away by time, leaving behind a rugged step-like skeleton. Unlike the famed pyramids of Giza, this one had no tourists, no guides, no cameras clicking. It was a structure that did not exist on any modern map, a pyramid denied by official history, and yet here it was, revealed after centuries by the shifting sands. Around its base sprawled the ruins of a complex, broken walls, half-buried chambers, and an avenue of crumbled pillars. The desert had tried to erase it, but enough remained to whisper of a forgotten kingdom, a place banished from memory. She adjusted the brim of her wide straw hat against the burning sun and allowed her gaze to sweep across the ruins. Somewhere, within those fractured walls, lay the truth she had crossed continents to find. Her name was Dr. Ilara Morgan, archaeologist, historian, and seeker of lost things. For years, she had been haunted by a story her mentor, Professor Alaric Hayes, had once told her, a story dismissed by scholars as the ravings of an eccentric old man. "There is a pyramid in the Nubian desert," Hayes had whispered to her. On his deathbed, not Egyptian, not Nubian, but older, darker, a place so dangerous it was erased from all records. They called it the Pyramid of Shadows. Find it, Ilara, but beware. The desert buries what the world is not meant to know. For months after his passing, she had tried to put the story aside, to immerse herself in safer excavations and academic lectures. But the words had dug their way into her thoughts like a splinter. When she stumbled across an obscure 1800s map in a forgotten colonial archive, a map where a lone pyramid had been drawn in this very region, then later scratched out in thick ink, she knew she had found the clue Hayes had promised. Now, after weeks of traveling by jeep, camel, and finally on foot, she stood at the edge of the impossible. The erased pyramid, very real, very silent, and very much alive in the heart of the desert. Her pulse quickened. This was no mere discovery. This was history reaching out with a buried hand. The weight of the desert Ilara began her descent toward the ruins, the hot sand sliding under her boots. She kept her satchel close, its leather cracked from years of use. Inside were her notebooks, a flashlight, a canteen of water, and the precious translation sheets she had compiled from countless hieroglyphs. As she moved closer, the air grew strangely cool, as if the pyramid exhaled a breath of its own. The silence deepened. Not even the desert hawks circled above this place. She entered the ruins, her fingers brushing over the sandstone blocks. Each wall fragment was carved with patterns, not the traditional Egyptian hieroglyphs she had studied all her life, but something different, sharper, almost unsettling in its geometry. It was as if the builders had blended human script with something alien. She knelt before one half-buried slab and brushed the sand away with her hands. The symbols came into view, and though she had never seen them before, she felt a tug of recognition. The slab seemed to whisper through her fingertips. Her heart pounded as she sketched the markings in her notebook. She didn't yet know what they said, but she knew they were a warning. The sealed passage at the base of the pyramid, she found what she hadn't dared to hope for, a doorway. It was sealed shut with massive stone blocks, their surfaces carved, with jagged figures of men kneeling before a dark figure wearing a mask of obsidian above the doorway. The inscription had been etched deeply, as though the stonemasons had wanted to ensure the message endured long after memory faded. Ilara held up her notebook, muttering the translation under her breath. He who enters without the light shall never return. The words sent a chill down her spine. She stepped back, wiping the sweat from her forehead. The warning wasn't metaphorical. She could feel that in her bones. It was literal. This pyramid was meant to devour intruders. Still, she felt the inexorable pull of destiny. She had not crossed the desert to turn away now. Unclipping her satchel, she withdrew a crowbar and small chisel. With steady strikes, she worked at the edges of the stone blocks. The desert sun shifted above her. An hour slipped by, marked only by the scrape of metal against stone. Finally, with a deep groan, one of the blocks shifted and tumbled inward, revealing a narrow passage that breathed stale air into her face. It smelled of dust, of age, and faintly of something metallic. Ilara shone her flashlight inside. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing a corridor descending into the pyramid's heart. The walls shimmered faintly as if painted with mineral dust that caught even the faintest light. Her hand trembled. This was it. The threshold of the forbiddance. The pull of the pyramid for a moment. She hesitated. She thought of Professor Hayes, of his desperate eyes as he clutched her hand with the last of his strength. She thought of the countless explorers who had vanished in deserts chasing myths. And she thought of her own unyielding hunger, the need to know, to uncover, to drag secrets into the light no matter the cost. She whispered to the silent ruins, "If there is truth here, I will find it." Then she stepped inside. The air grew cooler as the passage swallowed her. Each step echoed unnaturally, the sound stretching longer than it should. The beam of her flashlight quivered against the walls, picking out shapes carved deep into the stone. Figures of kings bowing not to Ra or Osiris, but to something vast and shapeless, painted as a black sun. Her breath quickened. The stories were true. This was not a pyramid of pharaohs. This was a temple to something older. The corridor sloped down sharply, forcing her to crouch. Sand trickled from cracks in the ceiling. Somewhere in the depths, she swore she heard movement, a faint shuffle, like fabric dragging against stone. She froze, straining her ears. Silence, not shaking off the unease. She pressed forward until she reached a wider chamber. Broken pottery lay scattered across the floor, and in the center stood a raised dais. Resting upon it was a tablet, half buried in sand. Ilara brushed it clean and traced the lines with her fingertips. It was another inscription, more elaborate than the first. Her lips formed the words as she read, "He who wears the mask commands the dead. He who breaks the seal awakens the forgotten." Her pulse thundered. A mask, a forgotten king. A command over death itself. She looked deeper into the shadows of the chamber. There were more passages branching off, twisting into darkness. One of them exhaled a faint current of air, as if beckoning her onward. Ilara straightened, her flashlight trembling in her grip. Every instinct screamed at her to turn back, to seal the entrance again and flee to the safety of the sunlit dunes. But her curiosity was stronger than her fear. She stepped forward, and from the shadows something stirred. The faint stirring in the shadows froze Ilara mid-step. Her heart hammered in her chest, every muscle coiled in silent anticipation. She swung the flashlight toward the passage, its beam slicing through dust and darkness. Nothing. The shadows remained. Still empty, and yet her skin prickled with certainty. She was not alone. Ilara forced a shaky breath, adjusted the strap of her satchel, and pressed onward. She reminded herself that it could have been loose sand shifting, or the creak of ancient stone. But the unease clung to her like cobwebs. The corridor narrowed again, forcing her to crouch low. The air was stale and bitter, filled with the acrid tang of old stone mixed with something faintly metallic, like rust or dried blood. She felt as though she were trespassing inside the ribs of some long-dead beast. Chamber of tests after several minutes of crawling and squeezing through tight passages. The corridor opened into a massive chamber. Her flashlight revealed a vaulted ceiling etched with constellations, but not the familiar stars of Egypt. These were alien arrangements, spirals and jagged lines forming patterns that defied the night sky. The floor was divided into square tiles, each painted with a different symbol: animals, weapons, suns, moons, and eyes. At the far end of the chamber stood a door of black stone, its surface carved with more warning script. Ilara's breath caught. The hieroglyphs read, "Step where truth lies, or fall into eternity." A puzzle. She crouched to examine the tiles. Some were cracked and crumbling, while others appeared untouched. The symbols were arranged in a chaotic grid. It reminded her of an old legend from her studies, the path of truth, where the seeker must walk upon symbols of life and avoid the signs of death. She scanned the tiles. Among the chaos, she noticed a repeating pattern: the sun, the Ankh, the falcon, life, divinity, protection. Carefully, she stepped onto a sun tile. The stone held firm. Her next step was onto the Ankh. The tile sank slightly, but did not collapse. A bead of sweat rolled down her temple. One wrong step, and the phrase "fall into eternity" might become horribly literal. She inched forward, heart racing with every choice. The silence of the chamber amplified her breathing, making it sound like the ragged gasp of a hunted animal. Halfway across, she hesitated. Two possible paths stretched before her, both leading toward the black door. One was lined with falcons and ankhs, the other with suns and moons. She chose the falcon, whispering a prayer to Horus, though she had never been a believer. When her boot pressed down, the tile clicked, and the tile directly behind her collapsed into a pit. She jerked forward instinctively and peered back. Below yawned a void of sharpened spikes, glinting like the teeth of a beast. Her chest tightened. She couldn't afford another mistake. With painstaking care, she traced the safe pattern across the chamber, each step feeling like the crossing of a tightrope over death. Finally, her foot touched the last tile. She stepped onto the stone dais before the black door, her legs trembling. The door of black stone up close. The door was immense, its surface carved with deep grooves that formed the face of a figure. A man wearing a mask that concealed everything but his eyes. The mask was etched in obsidian lines, jagged and unnatural. Her fingers brushed the stone. Cold, too cold. It felt more like metal than rock. At its base lay another inscription. She crouched to read. The king who wears the mask commands both life and death. None may pass who does not bow before him. Ilara frowned. Oh? Was this another puzzle? She thought quickly. If the builders demanded reverence, perhaps the door was triggered by gesture rather than force. She placed her flashlight between her teeth, set down her satchel, and knelt on both knees before the carved mask. At first, nothing happened. Then, with a grinding roar, the door trembled and split down the middle. Dust cascaded from the ceiling. As the halves groaned open, revealing a passage beyond, Ilara retrieved her belongings and stepped into the darkness. Whispers in the stone. The passage beyond was tighter, its walls so close she could brush both with outstretched arms. Strange, spiraling symbols ran along the stone, glowing faintly when her flashlight beam touched them, as though they drank the light. As she walked, a whisper threaded through the silence. It was so faint she thought at first it was the ringing in her ears. But then it grew clearer, syllables forming in a tongue she did not know. She froze, pressing herself against the wall. The whispering continued, rising and falling like a chant. It came from ahead. Her rational mind scrambled for explanations. Wind through cracks, shifting sand, her own exhaustion. But deep down she knew these were voices, and they had been whispering long before she arrived. The passage ended in a spiral staircase carved downward into the stone. Each step was worn smooth, as if by countless feet over centuries. She descended slowly, the whispers growing louder with every step. The hall of murals at the base of the stairs. She entered a vast hall lit faintly by shafts of moonlight piercing cracks in the ceiling. The air was thick and musty, but it carried a strange energy, as though the chamber itself were alive. Murals covered every wall. Her flashlight flicked over scenes of pharaohs kneeling before a black sun, armies bowing to a masked figure, and priests carving symbols into their own flesh. Elara's stomach turned. This was no ordinary worship. This was devotion born of terror. The masked king was not adored. He was feared. At the far end of the hall, one mural stood apart. It showed the masked figure standing over a battlefield, his arms raised. From the earth below, skeletal hands and shadowy forms rose to obey him. His mask glowed with unnatural light. Beneath the mural, an inscription was carved deeper than all the others. She read slowly, her voice trembling. When the mask is worn, the king shall rise. When the mask is broken, the king shall fall. Until then, his guardian shall keep eternal watch. Her throat tightened. A guardian. Someone or something bound to protect this place. And suddenly, the shuffling sound she had heard earlier no longer seemed like imagination. The unseen presence Elara turned sharply, flashlight beams sweeping across the hall. Between two cracked pillars, something flickered, a shadow too solid, too deliberate. She took a step back, her hand instinctively gripping the crowbar in her satchel. The shadow moved. A dry scraping sound echoed, like bandages dragging across stone. Her breath caught. She raised the light, but the figure was gone. The whispers surged louder, filling the hall, bouncing from wall to wall until she could no longer tell if they came from the murals, the shadows, or her own mind. She forced herself forward, her boots crunching on ancient dust. The only way was deeper. She needed proof, records, anything she could take back to the world outside. Something to show Hayes had not been mad. Ahead, a narrow archway yawned, its lintel carved with the mask symbol. Again, beyond lay another stairwell, descending into darkness, so complete her flashlight seemed swallowed whole. Elara steadied her breath, wiped the sweat from her palms, and stepped into the abyss. The whispers fell silent. The air grew colder. And then, from the darkness below, came the unmistakable sound of footsteps climbing upward toward her. Elara froze at the stairwell, her flashlight trembling in her grip. The sound was unmistakable. Slow, deliberate footsteps rising from the darkness below. Each step echoed too long, as if the walls themselves were carrying the noise upward. Breath quickened. She wanted to believe it was her imagination, that perhaps loose stones were tumbling down the stairs. But the cadence was too measured, too human. And yet, not human. Her fingers tightened on the crowbar. "Who's there?" she called, her voice cracking against the silence. The footsteps halted. Then, with a sudden scrape, they began again. Faster, ascending with purpose. Panic surged. She darted back into the mural hall, her flashlight beam cutting wildly through the dark. Dust rose in her wake. Her instincts screamed to run, but there was nowhere to go. The passage she had entered through was far behind, and the hall itself was sealed by walls of stone. She turned just as a figure emerged from the stairwell. The guardian, appears it, stepped into the faint shaft of moonlight, and Elara's breath caught in her throat. The figure was tall, unnaturally so, wrapped in brittle linen bandages that clung to withered flesh. Bronze ornaments clinked faintly against its ribs, the remains of ceremonial armor. Its face was hidden beneath a decayed mask of gold, crudely hammered into the likeness of a human visage. But the mask was broken, and through the cracks she glimpsed the hollow sockets of eyes that still glowed faintly with ember light. When it spoke, the voice was a rasp of dry air forced through a throat that had not drawn breath in millennia. Turn back. Alara stumbled a step away, the Scylla, crowbar raised uselessly in her hand. What are you? The creature tilted its head. The sound of bones creaked beneath its wrappings. Guardian, eternal oath. None may disturb the king. None may break the mask. Her pulse thundered in her ears. The words from the Eon. Inscriptions flooded back to her. The guardian, who would keep eternal watch until the king's return. She tried to steady her voice. I don't seek to disturb. I seek knowledge. The guardian's chest rattled with something like a laugh. Dry and hollow. Knowledge is death. Turn back. Or join the countless who dared. It raised one skeletal arm, and with the gesture, the shadows in the hall stirred. Figures materialized from the darkness. Not solid, but spectral, their outlines wavering. Like smoke. Soldiers in tattered armor, eyes hollow, hands gripping phantom spears. Ilara's throat went dry. She was trapped got flight. Through the ruins the first of the spectral soldiers lurched forward, its feet not touching the ground. Ilara spun, flashlight beamed sweeping across the hall. She spotted another archway on the far side, a way deeper into. The pyramid dot without thinking, she bolted. The soldiers gave chase, their movements soundless but swift, slipping across the floor as if gliding on air. The guardian's voice thundered behind her. You cannot flee the oath of shadows. Ilara's boots pounded against the stone, her breath ragged. She darted through the archway and into a narrow passage. The walls seemed to close around her, and the whispers rose again, louder now, chanting in a tongue she could not comprehend. Passage twisted and turned, then abruptly opened into another chamber. She skidded to a halt, her flashlight beam revealing what lay inside. The burial chamber. The room was vast and circular, its ceiling lost in darkness. At the center rose a dais of black stone, and upon it rested a sarcophagus unlike any she had ever seen. It was gilded in gold, but veined with cracks, as if something within had strained against its confines for centuries. The lid bore the carving of a mask, jagged, obsidian, its eyes two hollow voids. Ilara's chest tightened. This was it, the resting place of the masked king, but she had no time to marvel. The whispers surged louder, echoing from the walls, and behind her she heard the scrape of the guardian's bandaged feet. She darted toward the sarcophagus, circling it in search of escape. To her right, a series of alcoves lined the walls, filled with ancient scrolls and offerings. To her left, another passage stretched into shadow. The guardian emerged from the archway, the spectral soldiers fanning out behind him. The air grew colder, oppressive, as if the chamber itself recognized their master-servant confrontation with the guardian era, backed against the sarcophagus. Clutching her crowbar, her voice shook. Why guard this place? He's dead. He's been dead for thousands of years. The guardian's glowing eyes fixed on her. Dead? No. Bound, waiting. The mask is eternal. The king is eternal. I am his hand. It stepped closer, each movement creaking with the sound of dry bones. Ilara's mind raced. She couldn't fight this thing. She couldn't outrun the soldiers. The only chance she had was the sarcophagus itself. She remembered the inscription in the mural hall. The mask is broken. The king shall fall. But the king hadn't fallen yet. And if he was bound, maybe she could use that against the guardian. You're afraid, she said suddenly, her words spilling out in desperation. You're afraid of what happens if someone else touches the sarcophagus. The guardian froze. The faint glow in its eyes flickered. Ilara seized her chance. She scrambled onto the dais, her hands pressing against the gilded lid. "What happens if I open it? What happens if I wake your king?" The guardian let out a roar that shook the chamber, a sound like stone tearing itself apart. The spectral soldiers surged forward. Alara shoved with all her strength. The lid of the sarcophagus groaned, cracks widening. A burst of icy air hissed out, extinguishing her flashlight for an instant. The guardian lunged, but it was too late. The lid toppled sideways with a thunderous crash, slamming against the dais. The awakening darkness exploded outward. A wave of black wind howled through the chamber, sending scrolls scattering and sand spiraling into the air. As spectral soldiers halted mid-charge, frozen in place, their hollow eyes locked on the open sarcophagus. Alara clung to the dais, her hair whipped around her face, her lungs burning with the chill. She forced her eyes upward. From within the sarcophagus, a shape rose. It was not flesh. It was not bone. It was shadow given form, coalescing into the shape of a man. The figure wore the mask, obsidian, jagged, its hollow eyes glowing with a sickly light. The air trembled around it, and the whispers became a deafening chorus. The guardian fell to its knees, bowing low, its voice a broken wail. "My king, you rise." Ilara's blood turned to ice. She had done it. She had awakened the very thing history had tried to erase. The masked figure turned its gaze toward her. The air seemed to buckle under the weight of its stare. And then, in a voice that was both many and one, it spoke. "At last, the sands return me." The chamber trembled as the masked figure rose fully from the sarcophagus. Shadow bled from its form like smoke, coiling across the floor, seeping into cracks in the stone. The whispers that had haunted Alara since her arrival now roared like 1,000 voices chanting in unison. The guardian remained kneeling, its broken body shuddering in reverence. "Forgive me, my king," it rasped. "I have kept the oath. I have kept the seal." The masked pharaoh raised one hand. The gesture silenced even the whispers. The guardian quivered as if electrified by the presence. Alara clung to the dais, struggling to breathe. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but her legs refused to obey. The being before her was not simply a king of men. It was something older, heavier, as if the weight of ages pressed through the mask itself. The pharaoh's hollow gaze fixed on her. "You, who wakes me? You carry the light of the living. You shall be the first to kneel." The words weren't spoken aloud. They reverberated inside her skull, each syllable vibrating through her bones. She staggered, gripping her head. "No," she gasped. "I won't." The air thickened. The shadows coiled upward, forming hands that reached toward her. She scrambled back across the dais, desperate, her flashlight beam flickering wildly. Guardian's choice. The guardian raised its head, torn between obedience and despair. For centuries it had served, bound by its oath. But as the pharaoh's power swelled, even the guardian seemed to shrink in fear. Alara saw it, the hesitation, the faint crack in the eternal vow. "You don't want this," she shouted at the guardian. "You've kept him buried for a reason. You knew the world wasn't ready." The guardian's glowing eyes flickered. Its bandaged hands trembled. The pharaoh's voice thundered inside the chamber. "Silence. The oath binds you, priest. Bow." The guardian's body convulsed, caught between command and resistance. At last it slammed its fists against the floor, a guttural roar tearing from its chest. No more. It rose, staggering toward the dais, positioning itself between Alara and the pharaoh. The air cracked with tension, as if the very pyramid rebelled against such defiance. Revelation of the Maskalara's mind raced. Every inscription she'd read, every mural she'd seen, all pointed to one truth. The mask itself was the source of the pharaoh's power. Not the body, not the shadow, but the relic of obsidian fused to his being. When the mask is broken, the king shall fall. She looked upward. High above, cracks in the ceiling let in slivers of moonlight. The words carved. Over the sealed passage echoed in her memory. He who enters without the light shall never return. Light. That was the key dot, if she could expose the mask to true light, not this faint silver glow, but the blazing sun. Perhaps the pharaoh's hold would shatter, but dawn was hours away. Could she survive that long? The struggle the pharaoh extended his hand, and the shadows surged. Tendrils lashed outward, striking the guardian and hurling it against the far wall. The ancient protector crumbled, bones snapping. Ilara cried out, but the guardian raised a trembling hand, urging her to continue. Its glowing eyes locked with hers, filled not with malice now, but with a plea. End it. The pharaoh advanced, each step shaking the dais. The mask gleamed with unholy light, drinking in the shadows that writhed around it. Ilara clutched her satchel. Inside was her last hope, a flare, packed for emergencies in the desert. Her fingers scrabbled for it, fumbling. In panic, the pharaoh loomed above her, the mask's hollow eyes burning into her soul. Bow and live. Her hand closed on the flare. With a desperate cry, she yanked it free and struck it against the dais. A spear of crimson fire erupted, flooding the chamber with blazing light. The shadows recoiled, shrieking, curling away. From the flare's heat, the pharaoh staggered, his form flickering, the mask glowing red under the flare's glare. For the first time, Ilara saw him falter. The pharaoh's rage, the being roared. The sound so powerful dust cascaded from the ceiling. The murals along the walls cracked and split. Spectral soldiers screamed in silence and vanished into smoke. The pharaoh raised both arms, summoning a storm of shadow to crush her. Ilara raised the flare high, forcing herself to stand firm despite the terror clawing at her chest. Your reign ends here, she shouted. The flare hissed, its fire reflecting in the obsidian mask. Cracks began to spiderweb across the black surface, faint but growing. The pharaoh staggered again, his form flickering between shadow and emptiness. He lunged forward, but Ilara leapt aside. The flare slipped from her hand and rolled across the dais. The masked king shrieked, diving to snuff it out. The dawn breaks in that instant. The guardian rose one last time, broken, trembling, but resolute, with a cry that was both agony and triumph. It hurled itself at the pharaoh. The two collided, shadow against withered flesh. The guardian wrapped its arms around the king, dragging him toward the fractured ceiling. With inhuman strength, it slammed the pharaoh against the crack, where moonlight streamed and dotstone shattered. A fissure split wider across the ceiling. And, at last, the first ray of dawn spilled into the chamber. The light struck the mask. Scream unlike anything human tore through the pyramid. The obsidian surface cracked, split, and shattered in an explosion of black shards. The pharaoh's shadow form writhed, disintegrating into dust, sucked into the very cracks of the stone. The guardian collapsed with him, its oath finally fulfilled. Collapsed the pyramid roared as if alive. Stones split, dust billowed, and the floor began to crumble. Ilara scrambled from the dais, racing through falling debris. The flare sputtered out as dawn's light poured through the widening fissures above. She sprinted through the mural hall, past shattered soldiers that faded into nothing. The stairwell behind her collapsed, forcing her to climb jagged stones with bleeding hands. Her lungs burned, her heart pounding, but instinct drove her onward. At last she saw it. The original passage she had entered through, now collapsing with sand pouring in like a flood. She hurled herself forward, dragging her body through the narrow gap as the pyramid groaned behind her. She burst into the open desert. Just as the ground shuddered violently, the sands, remember Lara, collapsed on the dunes, coughing, covered in dust and blood. Behind her, the pyramid shook, its peak crumbling, walls splitting. Slowly, inexorably, the entire structure sank into the desert, swallowed by the shifting sands. Within minutes, all that remained was a jagged ruin, half buried once more. Sun rose over the horizon, painting the dunes gold. The desert was silent again. Ilara lay there, staring at the horizon, trembling with exhaustion. She thought of Hayes, of his haunted eyes. He had been right. The Pyramid of Shadows had existed. Its king had been real. And now it was gone. She rolled onto her back, closing her eyes as tears mixed with the dust on her face. A whisper echoed, faintly in her ears, not of menace, but of release. The guardian's voice, soft and fading. The oath is ended. Ilara let out a shuddering breath. The world would never know what had transpired here. Historians would dismiss her story. The desert would bury its secret again. But she knew, and she would never forget the face of the mask, nor the truth hidden beneath the sands. She stood slowly, her legs unsteady, and gazed at the empty horizon. Some secrets, she whispered, are not meant to be uncovered. And yet, as the wind stirred the dunes, she thought she heard the faintest echo, as if the desert itself still remembered.